Good evening, ladies, gentlemen, and others, and welcome to Encyclopedia.Zone. My name is Dr. Don Jolly. I am the editor-in-chief of Encyclopedia.Zone, the internet's premier home for literary shitposting, and we apologize for the interruption of service, but we are back now with a brand new video and a brand new update at Encyclopedia.Zone. Point your browsers in that direction. You will be able to check it out. This is the poetry update, long in the making. This is a collection of poems by the greatest poets on the zone, including Sophia Pfister, Hayden Church, PRTBC, edited by Max Roderick, whose work you may have seen in Dagger Magazine, among many other places. His work has appeared in previous issues of the Zone, including the Quarantine Fun Zone issue from last month. And or month before last. This was supposed to be the May update, but things have gotten a little crazy, so we had a slight delay in getting it up. But anyway, it's up now. Brand new update, poetry at Encyclopedia.Zone with beautiful layouts and artwork by Zone House Northwest, Container Corps, and Civ Wrecker. Thank you very much for everybody, all the poets who contributed. And once again, that's Sophia Pfister, Red Ranger, Hayden Church, PRTBC, and Max Roderick, who also edited the update with art and design by Zone House Northwest. That is Civ Wrecker and Container Corps. Thank you so much to everybody. This is a beautiful update. I hope that you really enjoy it. So we're going to talk about a little bit... we're going to talk about some current events for a second, and then we're actually going to have some readings from all the poets involved in the update. Each one of them has read one of their poems, and that's going to be a little bit later in the video after we get caught up with some of the events that have been transpiring lately. If you like what we're doing here at Encyclopedia.Zone, you want to help us get more updates out in a more timely fashion, you want to help me get more time to work on the zone, you could support us at patreon.com/HRC2020. So thank you very much. And without further ado, let's move on to talk about poems and protests. Actually, scratch that. We have one more announcement that we have to cover before we get started. We are currently accepting submissions for a new issue of Encyclopedia.Zone, which will be up later in the month. It is the Mayhem issue. We are talking about all the doings that been a transpiring over the last few days. Tell us what it's been like for you. Tell us how you're distracting yourself. Tell us if you're not distracting yourself. Poems, comics, artwork, anything you can think of. We are accepting submissions for our new issue. Link in the description below to the forum thread. You can either post it on Encyclopedia.Zone if you have a forum account, or you can send your submission directly to encyclopediazone@gmail.com. And once again, details are below. So if you have anything to contribute to the Mayhem issue, check it out. The deadline is June 12th. Thank you very much. So, a lot of news lately. We're drowning in news, as anybody who's been paying even the least bit of attention by now probably knows. Last week, a man named George Floyd was killed in Minneapolis by police officer Derek Chauvin. It was caught on camera, an excruciating 9-minute-long execution, and this has sparked a wave of protests across the United States that have metastasized, sometimes bleeding into riots, altercations with the police. Basically, there is violence in the streets nationwide. President Trump, as of last night, has promised to mobilize the military on American soil to put it down. And we are currently, I'm not going to go off on it too crazy. I think I might do a second video this week. But essentially, we are awash in a constant stream of very upsetting information. And, sometimes not so upsetting information, sometimes just bizarre information. Zoo animals have been released from their pens in Milwaukee. There's a hippopotamus wandering the streets. There's a giraffe walking along the highway. There's police officers ramming their vehicles through protesters in Brooklyn. There's a police officer injured in Brooklyn, getting carried off on a stretcher. 400-pound man with I believe it was a blood sugar condition. I think he was rushed to a Dunkin' Donuts. We have confusing altercations in Los Angeles, people firing at the State House in Colorado. To get off of the protests and the riots and etc. For just a second, we have antitrust proceedings going against Google. The president last week issued a executive order designed, speaking roughly, to protect the rights of shit posters. Meanwhile, he's rolling back internet protections in other ways. There are mayors lying to the American people. There are police officers that are instigating violence. There are protesters that are instigating violence. There's murders that are happening that are being covered up. In Louisville, the owner of a barbecue restaurant was shot by police, and his body was left in the streets for 12 hours. And if you wanted to, you could go and dig up a little article about every single one of these things, or a little tweet, or a little video, or a little segment on Rising with Crystal Ball. We are awash in news, and it's a little weird to be launching, we just did our poetry update. It's a little bit weird to be launching any kind of competing content when you're up against this torrent of information, this torrent of just like fascinating, upsetting, disturbing information, this torrent of news. And usually the news cycles are pretty draconian as it stands, but like now especially, this is a very difficult information ecosystem in which to raise any topic other than the ones that are, of course, at the forefront of everybody's mind. And I'm not saying that they don't deserve to be at the forefront of everybody's mind. I'm not denigrating either the fear that people have of the police or the fear that people have of the breakdown of public order. The chaos that has been unleashed in all directions is a very threatening thing to all of us. And I understand that consuming this news is in some way an attempt for us to try and get a handle on this chaos, because chaos is very threatening. We feel like we don't understand it. And what news promises, what information promises, writ large, is understanding and hence control. So the more we plug ourselves into the ecosystem of information that comes out of these news sources and, Twitter, etc., these various platforms, the more we feel like we are in control of a very chaotic situation, which, if we're speaking honestly, nobody is directly in control of. Not even the people who are flexing like they are. Not even President Trump, who's talking about putting the army to work in the interest of regaining control and civil composure. None of us is in control right now, and that's scary. So you want to suck up as much information as you can so that you can delineate all this chaos into an understandable narrative. And that's something that's been happening. If you're getting a lot of your news from Twitter, which is kind of where I'm at the moment. I mean, I read a couple of newspapers, but honestly, I've been finding it too upsetting lately, at least in the last week, to engage with that on a substantial level. So I've just been seeing this micro burst of information, this constant stream of upsetting violence that is delivered to me through Twitter. And if you consume your news that way, no matter how you consume your news, because you see it happening on network television, you see it happening on cable, you see it happening in the newspapers, there's a lot of push to narrativize what's going on right now. We have to make it fit into some ideological framework, which, once again, imposes order on an inherently chaotic situation. So you see a lot of rhetoric about history right now, because history is all of this chaos, the chaos of the president, safely congealed into an understandable past, a textual past. This is why we have this deep drive, I think, to find the iconic image of whatever's going on. I mean, I've seen a million Twitter posts. I mean, that's exaggerating, but I've seen more than a few Twitter posts, either by photographers or by people that have found photographs on their various information streams saying, this is the iconic image of the protest, or this is the iconic image of the protest. And kind of what iconic image you choose depends on how you want to interpret what's going on right now. Maybe it's a black man on his knees in front of the police peacefully protesting. Maybe it's a white guy with a sword who writes for Terror House Mag, beaten in the streets of Dallas because he was chasing people around with a sword. I mean, initially the story, I think Andy No posted this. Initially, the story was that he was defending the bar where he worked, but as it turns out, he was just kind of like down there to play Crusader Kings IRL. People are choosing iconic images that fit the narrative that they want to impose on, once again, what is inherently a chaotic situation for which no narrative yet exists. There's a deep hunger to find the narrative that fits these events and to take the very upsetting present and safely consign it to the historical past. And I share this desire too, because I'm not outside of being upset by what's going on. If you have been watching the channel, a couple of days ago, I live streamed from the protests down here in Austin, Texas on Sunday night. And it was during the day. It was before any of the looting that apparently happened. I mean, I don't know exactly what happened on Sunday. I know that there were some windows broken at a Target off of 35. I know that there was a homeless man's possessions were set on fire underneath 35, like later in the night when the protests got more rowdy or perhaps blended into riots. I don't know. People said it was InfoWars. People said it wasn't InfoWars. But personally, I don't believe InfoWars would set a homeless man's possessions on fire. I just don't think that fits their MO. Not to claim that there's some, kind of perfect angel baby that would never do anything untoward. It just, I don't see them doing that. But, who knows? Who knows? When you look at Twitter, the information that you get out of this stuff is just all the most violent and spectacular incidents that have happened all across the country in one long stream of just constantly perverse information that convinces you that things are perhaps much, much worse than they actually are. Once again, not to say that things are great, but I think that you get a jaundiced point of view when you look at only the most violent incidences that can be collected and assembled into 10-second clips and posted on a Twitter timeline. I was actually down at the protests on Sunday, and for the most part, I found it to be, pretty much in line with my experience at other protests that I've been to in Austin, Texas, and elsewhere. I don't think it was a superficial thing. I don't think it was a LARPing activity. I didn't see people behaving in, a totally barbaric way. For the most part, I found the protesters to be behaving in a raucous fashion. I mean, they're taking over highways and stuff like that. But for the most part, they were, not threatening anybody, certainly not threatening the cops physically. And I saw more police officers than I ever have in my life. We walked behind the police line and ended up in the middle of a shift change where officers from surrounding precincts were being brought downtown in city buses that had been commandeered for that purpose. And so we were behind the police line when just hundreds and hundreds of cops were dislodging and taking up positions, around police headquarters and City Hall, and presumably feeding into the Capitol, where there was another protest as well. There was there was pepper spray that was released from a balcony by bicycle cops. They shot rubber bullets at us. That's all on the live stream. But, it's that once again, I'm kind of playing into the Twitter algorithm thing by highlighting the most spectacular and violent incidents from an hour and 10 minutes of covering this protest live. That, for the most part, was relatively calm. I mean, we saw some graffiti. We saw some people yelling at the cops. And we got one woman yelling at the cops in a really funny way that even had them cracking up. Got some of that on camera. It's an hour and 10 minutes, and I'm talking about the 10 worst seconds, which, why do I do that? Because obviously I have a desire for you to watch the video, and I understand that what works on the internet is always going to be the most gregarious, the most spectacular, the most violent, and this is key, the most upsetting information possible. This is the premise behind clickbait, right? This is the kind of information that is privileged on the internet. Now, on old media platforms, and when I say old media, I'm talking about sort of survivors and, stylistic descendants of 20th century mass media. the big television networks, the newspapers, back when the technology of mass production was more concentrated in a limited number of hands. I mean, now that we have the internet, basically everybody, or I mean, at least many more people, have the capacity to produce information and, quote unquote, content that can get out to a theoretical audience that is not restricted by geography. And it's not exactly the same as the old mass media audience, because the old mass media audience could be tens, hundreds of millions of people, because essentially there was no competition. The new media audience is always going to be fragmented. So anything that you make, for the most part, is going to get out to less people in total, but it does have a theoretical audience that is not restricted by geography, that's not restricted by time. It is instantly transmissible, instantly accessible from everywhere on the planet that has an internet connection, which is a lot of the planet at this point, except for Washington, D.C. for a little while earlier this week. I mean, asterisk, I don't know. I don't know what the fuck's going on. Like I said, I'm just in the middle of the chaos like everybody else. But apparently the internet was blacked out in Washington, D.C. for a certain amount of time. We actually have a correspondent for the Zone on the ground in Washington, D.C. I should ask him about that. You'll be able to read more about this topic in the Mayhem issue. And once again, if you have anything to contribute for that, the deadline is June 12th. So we're awash in this constant stream of very violent information. And like I said, old media, old legacy mass media, it privileges a certain kind of information. I think it privileges the information of predictability. It privileges the information of stability. It privileges the information that can be scheduled ahead of time so that you can dispatch people to cover it, so that you could do the necessary production work to get this in the various technological mass media forms that were available at the time. And so and we could go off on this topic for a long time. If you're interested in it, I really recommend Edward J. Epstein's News from Nowhere, which is a great sociological study of actually mid-20th century television news, where he talks about the bias towards predictability that is sort of built into the form. And I think that applies to like 20th century newspapers, stuff like that. The internet privileges immediacy because, like I said, the internet, it's the most effective the most effective and the most democratized mass media communication tool that has yet been developed. I'm not saying it's perfect, but it is the most efficient, the quickest, the most universal that has yet been developed. It is a pretty big technology in the grand scheme of how these things work. And what it privileges is immediacy, because the internet is so quick. And especially when you're in a situation like this where people are feeling like that things are spiraling out of control and they have that desire to sort of grab hold of the chaos and produce a narrative about it, there's a lot of value in being immediate, in being the newer thing. And you see that the scale at which the news cycles are moving is accelerating. This isn't a new observation by any stretch of the imagination. People were talking about how the 24-hour news cycle of cable news accelerated the world versus the sort of the daily news cycle, where you basically would get like a news update a couple of times a day as opposed to 24 hours of coverage that you would see in television and nightly news broadcast and etc. Like now with the internet, we're seeing news cycles that last 25 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour. Things come and things go. There's a lot of value in recency. And one of the only ways that you can break through the recency bias is with pure nightmarish spectacle. Violence is privileged on the internet. Hate is privileged on the internet. Confrontation is privileged on the internet. Breakdown is privileged on the internet. And partially this is because I think our political philosophies have become very nihilistic and very cynical, to where they are focused on finding the failures of our various interlocking social systems. And I'm guilty of this too. Partially, I think it's also because if you've got so much fucking noise, when you hear good news, I mean, that's being a little bit too simple about it. But like, outrage cuts through time much more efficiently than competing feelings and competing forms of engagement. If you can make people feel afraid and you can make people feel outraged, then you can create a very durable story. I mean, this is a pattern that the mainstream press, especially the political press, has been engaging with since the beginning of Trump's campaign. Trump is essentially, he is so successful, at least in part, because he is able to produce outrageous news, outraging news, so predictably and so profitably for all of the media entities that are involved in covering him. He produces outrage and fear at a prodigious rate that allows these legacy media companies specifically, and not just legacy media, but like legacy media and those elements of new media that are willing to engage with the Trump outrage narratives, or in their inverse on the right wing, the like, look at how outraged these liberals are about Trump, which I think is kind of the primary, quote unquote right wing, because this isn't really about political ideology, but like the pro-Trump internet is primarily concerned with how butthurt the anti-Trump internet is about Trump. They're both part of this ecosystem of outrage. And this just gives him an incredible ability to cut through and dominate specifically internet news cycles, but also television news cycles, newspaper news cycles. Donald Trump is so successful because he is upsetting. And you see that now with him using tear gas to clear protesters away from the church in Washington, D.C., where he posed for his ridiculous photo op holding up the Bible. You see people getting super outraged about this, but I'm thinking, like, I mean, who knows if we're even going to have an election, but like, the guy is a genius at creating these fucking lightning rod images, these lightning rod situations. And like, you might not see it on Twitter, and you're definitely not going to read about it in the New York Times, but there's a lot of America that saw Trump holding up that Bible, that sees those protesters getting gassed and thinks it's a good thing. If anything, he's come out of this so far improving his chances at re-election. Once again, who knows if we're even going to have an election? That's a discussion for a different time. But we're awash in this extremely upsetting news. And once again, not to denigrate what's going on or minimize any of the ideologies that people are looking at here. I mean, 40 million Americans are out of work. I believe that there is a legitimate, very legitimate set of grievances that people have about police violence, especially in the Black community, the Latino community. This is, we've been living with this shit as long as there's been America. We have reliable racial altercations in this country because there's a shameful history in the race relations of the United States. We've had 7 days of continued unrest because everybody's out of fucking work. And let's not forget, you want to talk about the accelerating pace of news cycles? 2 weeks ago, a week ago even, the big controversy was that people were going outside because of Memorial Day. That's going to cause a big uptick in COVID deaths because we've been under lockdown for 3 months. It's been illegal to go outside for 3 months. I talked about this in a video I did called "Going Outside is Now a Political Action" when the lockdown was lifted enough in Texas that I actually started returning to work. And people are stirred up. People are rightfully very upset. And we have arrived by, steps so small that I don't think people even realized they were taking them, in a place where public discourse has stepped out of control. We have entered chaos, and now we are reaping the whirlwind. And so we're on our back foot. We're trying to figure out what this means. We want it to end. We want it to stop being the present and start being history. And so we are in a rush, not only to consume information about it, to constantly be hooked up to this news cycle, but also to turn that information to conform to whatever ideological schema we would choose to place on it. We want this all to be settled. We want to be codified. We want so badly to know what is going on, to just have some kind of handle on what is going on. And you know what? I think it's all pretty futile. I think if we are going to get any kind of delineated understanding of this, it's not going to come right now. And, you know, as fascinating as all this is, and as addicted to the stream of information as I am, I don't know how much good there is in compulsively locking in to the constant rush of upset and outrage that comes from following these news cycles. I'm not saying to be uninformed, but I'm saying that there is a difference between being informed and entering a condition of cyberpsychosis because you are, compulsively rubbernecking at the mass breakdown of social order that is occurring in the United States right now. This reminds me of something that happened in 2016, and this is a little bit of an embarrassing story because this was, I guess, right after the election or right before the election of Donald Trump, and I had sort of lost my mind running up to this thing because it was early in 2015 that I looked at the television ratings that Donald Trump was getting, and I actually wrote about this for the Revealer magazine. If you want to dig back through the column I was writing at the time and that I shamefully did not complete because I started to lose my mental composure, it was called Salem 66. My current political column is called HRC 2020. I like the numbers. I like the letters and numbers. I don't know. I guess like if I get to be 60 and I'm still making creative work, everything I do is going to just be called like ZZX 2250 or something. THX 1138, that kind of bullshit. Anyway, I had realized that Trump was going to win the election, and then I had sort of signed on to I was shitposting all day on 4chan and 8chan, doing digs through various document dumps, making all the fucking memes and shitposts that I could, because it was this movement that had sort of brought together a lot of disparate elements on the internet, and because it seemed to be an opportunity to sort of finally and explosively humiliate and embarrass not only the existing political establishment, but more crucially, the media establishment, for which I still have a lot of, deserved or undeserved animus. And I started to really feel like I could see what was going to happen, because everybody was telling me, oh, it's impossible Trump's going to win. It's impossible Trump's going to win. And I'm like, no, he's going to win. This is working. You don't understand what's going on. I felt like I had some kind of gift of prophecy. And this is actually a really terrible condition to be in, because simultaneously you have the anxiety of like, what if I'm wrong? What have I done to my life? And you have the anxiety of what if I'm right? Because, I saw the thing that was happening around Donald Trump, the racial rhetoric that was coming up around the campaign. I saw the pitch black cynicism of those memes. I understood it. I knew that it would work, but I was terrified of it. I did not like the idea of what was going to happen. And like I said, it was either slightly before or slightly after the election. And it says something about my state of mind that I can't remember. I can't place it exactly. I became very upset, and I didn't really have anybody that I wanted to bother with the particular confluence of feelings that I was having. So I called a suicide hotline, and I started laying this out for them. I was like, look, I'm 30 years old. I don't have a house. I don't have any chance of making a decent amount of money. I owe so much money on my student loans. I'm never going to be able to pay it off. I don't have a future. I look at the world. I don't think it has a future. I see people in way more dire financial straits than me, crushed by either alternative forms of debt or just people who have never had an opportunity to even, get out from under the basic poverty in which they were born. I see an increasingly dehumanized society. I see people getting meaner. I see things getting more violent and ugly. I said, there's going to be tanks in the streets, and there's going to be buildings on fire, and there's going to be people getting killed, and I don't want to see it. And I asked the suicide hotline, it was a very nice woman that I was talking to, I said, are you excited about the next few years? Are you excited about what's going to happen? And she said to me, I can't answer that question. I can only say, that must be hard. And then she paused and said, that must be hard. My point is, when you're engaging with this torrent of information, you're trying to find some kind of understanding. You're trying to find some kind of peace. You're trying to find some kind of, you're trying to find the bigger pattern where all of these things fit together, right? It's like the suicide hotline. The news of the protests or whatever else, the constant stream of information, the oppression of the current is like the suicide hotline or a Long Island City stripper. It'll hear you out. It might even get you off occasionally, but it's never going to kiss you on the mouth. It's always going to tease you with an absolution that it never provides. And that's the difficulty of the news. You follow it in a constant state of frustration because it promises something that by design it cannot deliver. It's always promising some kind of final understanding that never arrives because there's always new information. There's always more, it's always worse, and there's no kind of synthesis that you will ever get out of following this damnably recent cycle of information. So this brings me to kind of a synthetic thought, a piece of truth, if you will. And journalism, news, it contains a lot of facts arranged for particular purpose, but I would argue that it does not contain an ounce of truth, which is to say that, transcendent truth, overarching truth, synthetic truth. You're not going to get it from there. That's not what it's for. You could get facts, but the conclusions you draw have to be your own. The truth I want to bring up is from Catullus, and he said, Odi et amo, I hate and I love. I'm sure I mangled the Latin pronunciation there. I apologize. Catullus died 54 years before Christ was born, and that line, I hate and I love, Odi et amo, is just as true now, just as impactful. I remember, it kind of took me by surprise when I first encountered it, and, I rolled it over and committed it to memory, and it's been in the back of my head ever since. It is just as true now as when it was written. And whatever, they didn't have newspapers, they didn't have the internet, they didn't have Twitter back then, but whatever the current events were, whatever the big controversy of the day, whatever the public gossip, whatever was happening in the forum 54 years before the birth of Christ, when Catullus died, or on the day that he composed, however, we don't know exactly when it happened, but whenever he composed this fragment of poetry, we don't know. We can speculate about the historical conditions that surrounded it, but the words, the poetry, survives. And that's what's so important about reading poetry in the middle of a cataclysm like this. Because, I think the poems that we're featuring in the update on encyclopedia.zone are really fucking good. We've got very talented people that run the gamut from sort of more traditional poets to shitposty poets. We've got a lot of very unique individual styles. And if this work speaks to you, it will still speak to you when whatever history has decided, whatever narrative actually does come out of these events, is congealed and settled and set down in whatever the future distance learning bullshit version of a history book is. History PDF, virtual reality history suppository. Whatever it is, when it's fucking done and it's settled and it's in the past, the circumstances of this thing that we are all wrapped up in, this firestorm that is taking so much of our time and energy, when those are forgotten, these lines of poetry have the potential to survive. And that's the utility of poetry. And it's the utility of shitposting, which is, there's no reason that it has to be tied to this sort of cycle of recency which defines news and drama and so much of the information that is presented on the internet. I think because one of the big advantages that the internet has is inherently its speed. So that tends to privilege speedy information. Once again, it privileges recency and it privileges outrage. But there's no reason that it can't also be a conveyance mechanism for human truths and just plain old-fashioned artistic beauty. So with that in mind, I hope that you will very much enjoy these readings from the poets of Encyclopedia.zone, including Sophia Pfister, who is in the band Two Neighbors. Once again, we are providing a link down in the description below to her material, and she is reading her poem, Young Girls. We've got another poem by Hayden Church. You can follow him on Twitter at RealHoloful. We've got TBC, or PRTBC, as he's known on the Encyclopedia.zone forums. This guy is a fucking wild hair genius kind of guy. It's like talking to Finnegan's Wake when you chat with him online. He's reading one of his poems here. Red Ranger, who's another just truly excellent shitpost poet. And I don't mean that to denigrate him. I mean that his stuff is sort of in this really interesting middle ground between what you'd see in, sort of a more creative internet shitpost, 4chan green text kind of thing, and what you would see in sort of experimental poetry. So Red Ranger, he also has, he had a website for a little while. I think he's taken it down, sadly. But if he, Red Ranger, please bring your website back up because it was really beautifully designed. We also have a piece from Max Roderick. He's rounding out the list of poets here. And Max Roderick is one of my closest friends, and he's an excellent fucking poet. He's been featured all over Dagger Magazine, both online and in the print edition. We're going to have a lovely essay of his in the upcoming Encyclopedia.zone print issue. Once again, he was featured in the Quarantine Fun Zone update, and he actually edited this update. He was very proactive about it. And so he put the whole thing together. He gave everybody notes, revised everybody, and got these poems in absolutely tip-top shape. And he's rounding out our readings today. Once again, if you want to read more from these excellent poets, you could do so at Encyclopedia.zone, where the poetry update is now available. And without further ado, and designs and artwork on the poetry update, once again, was done by Zone House Northwest, coming out of the beautiful Pacific Northwest, which is only slightly on fire, courtesy of Container Core and Civ Wrecker. So without further ado, we're going to have some readings from the poetry update by the poets of Encyclopedia.zone. Join us here on the channel, I believe later in the week, definitely next week, for more video content that cats crave, and go to Encyclopedia.zone, check out the poetry update. If you have anything to submit by June 12th, the Mayhem issue is currently accepting submissions. So thank you so much, and everybody have an excellent week. Whoa, okay, sorry to do this, but one last thing. The music track over the forthcoming poetry readings was composed by Grafo Volaverant. I might be mispronouncing that. His website is once again linked in the description below. It's also available on the Encyclopedia.zone front page. He's been doing music for various Encyclopedia.zone and Interactive.zone projects for a long time now. He's a fucking certified genius. Thank you very much, Grafo. The track is Cluster Church.
It's 1 a.m. and a man gets into his car and turns on the headlights. They shine into my bedroom window. I'm lying in bed wearing pink, staring at him, blinded, wondering if he is also staring at me. He is. We are staring at each other because this is Middle America and there is nothing else to stare at. Just sky that is too big and road that goes on forever. Maybe this is love. Maybe I have the upper hand. I wonder if he likes pink on women or just young girls. Everyone loves young girls. To murder, to fuck, to love, to lie to. Only young girls would stare at a man parked outside her bedroom window and think it's love.
There is no greater horror than denial. To look upon a grand deceit with unflinching banality, at chaos inches from your face, nostrils smoking, its ragged breaths and lidless eyes, sweating with pure contempt. To sit around the feasting table with stolid apathy, as vultures peel your priceless pride, as vultures drag away desire. Let ourselves be licked by flames, and through subversion of the senses, think we are encased in sunlight, the warmest hearts, the quickest kindling. When what you see is insufficient, do your hands not tremble forward, demanding action, demanding your designs be born? Why does your craven heart collapse at the prospect of a life fulfilled, retreating into daydreams made nightmares by neglect? How dare such a man exist? By what right do you walk the earth, twice taking every step, the former flesh, the latter fancy, remade in your vision? Are you content to cherry-pick a life apart?
My log cabin hands once palmed virgin quartz pieces like queer gems to circumscribe an oculus mace. A hot air balloon blinks, a pneumatic puff floats me away, and I'm back at our pond. The slumping metals Michael's taut jaws gnawed and spit off our roof, crumpled in a car crash around our oaks, stomping their leaves. I canine my left cheek and remark how I'll cry at the smallest things. Like how Mikey cries, like how girls will cry. Like how my legs will detach, screws loose, fizzing, drowning tabs of effordent, and squeeze the smallest globs of Gorilla Glue in place, so I'll live in parentheses. 100 tears funneled through a sieve, like when Mikey cries, like when boys will cry, and will offer my body for the altar fire. Stone-walled vanguards cycled in loose change, our brains stepping out for a pack of smokes as we're bound, unbonded, infamous, remarking our own private Idahos.
Game is to mud as Mame is to Spud. Kirchhoff is to nonce as Paul is to Chaucer. Eth is to thorn as torn is to thorn, or cantor is to candor. Born is to score. Calathos lives by Keast as Dribble lives by Swish. Knight lives by Mare as Ophir lives by Arrendator. Soso lives by Oso as Otto lives by Toto. Voynich lives by gibberish as Hoydinus lives by Palpal Emanence. Space lives by Cat as Bilbo lives by Balkhend Delinquents. Tolkien is to Bolton as Martin is to Eru. Deicide is to Decide as Suicide is to Suices. Sluice is to Choice as Sleuth is to Choyuth. Phoenix is to Phoenix as Techne is to Enix. Jesus died from Protagons as Agonal dies from Senescence. Turner dies from Diarist as Park dies from Chironomus. Ware dies from Brook as Oakorb dies from Reified Wayeliad. Prime dies from Real as Halieutic dies from Fish Aryan Runaway. Fealty dies from Ben as Her I die from Withen. Game as to Mame as Spud as to Mud. Is Bath as to Jenkin as Salt is to Catkin. As The is to North as Bard is to Worth. Or Godel is as Goebbels. Scorn to Bor. As Iterant is to Interregnum. For palimpsest, read Pentimento.
This was always a world of mongers, and what is there to fear in it? Bibles, dogs, and dirty underwear are bought in discount lots. The only difference is the market share, and those margins aren't as wide as you think. But fear is our all-time top seller, a golden ticket, no limit to supply, no overhead at all, and demand doesn't matter. It's only a token next to compulsion. Why do you think we turned video games into slot machines, food into sugar, music into methamphetamine? People will buy it, they'll hate themselves for it, and we'll sell them a cure for hate. Some will learn to live with hate, even think it does them good, but don't you worry, we account for shrinkage. And anyway, if we can't sell to you, we'll buy you up and sell you for pennies on the dollar. See, most people these days spend more time constructing memoirs than living their lives, and they don't ask if their stories are good, they ask, will it ever sell? It takes hardly a handful of change to put them in your pocket forever. I would say it was pitiful if it wasn't the best deal a human ever had. Cared for, no, loved, in a world of definite worth, where for once all the numbers are known, even yours. On the low end, but you always knew that. A clean accounting, meaning more to your day-to-day than 206 bones, 650 muscles, a handful of cum worth 1 million newborn babies, that, and up to 114 divine chakras, depending on who you ask. But you're more than that. You're a bag of organs worth about $1 billion to certain markets. Can you even imagine the value you're getting, using them all for free, 99% legally? It's more than 100 times what the government spent on your education, and we still aren't through. I haven't even touched on your father's dignity or your mother's love. Boy, it's no exaggeration to say you're worth more than the stars themselves. Now don't you feel silly for skipping meals and counting pennies? Don't you feel silly for buying that gun and shooting your expletives out?